Incident classification, blank. Senior Compliance Officer Brest Talon had been staring at that field for 40 minutes. The dropdown had 47 options. She had opened it 6 times. She had closed it 6 times. The closest available option was number 44, Containment Anomaly Unresolved. She had highlighted it twice. She had not selected it. Her colleagues would later note, reviewing the gallery observation log, that Talon's finger had not tapped the desk edge in 11 minutes. They would consider this the most alarming detail in an incident record that contained several alarming details. The contact window was still live on her secondary screen. The Scarath Category 9.4 fauna, adult female, approximately 380 kilograms, was settled on the floor of holding tier Bren South. Her dermal plating had stopped cycling. The juvenile was visible on the boot of the human sitting cross-legged beside her. No warning had preceded any of this. No certified procedure had produced it. No form in the Pelin Reach Containment Authority database had a field for what Talon had spent 31 minutes watching. 17 automated systems had escalated simultaneously at minute 31. The human had not escalated at all. This was, Talon reflected, the crux of the classification problem. She was, professionally, very good at being accurate about inconvenient things. This report would be reviewed by 3 separate oversight bodies. She intended to be accurate even where accuracy was going to make all 3 of them uncomfortable. She opened the dropdown a 7th time. She read all 47 options. She closed it again. The part that comes next, no one in that gallery had a form for it. Stay close. 31 minutes earlier, Annular Processing Hub Casanorvith had smelled the same way it always smelled. Recycled nitrogen and the faint warmth of polymer from the thermal seals that lined every cargo corridor on the inner ring. The smell did not change between shifts. It did not change between cycles. Maintenance workers on long rotations sometimes reported that they stopped noticing it after about 6 weeks, and then noticed it again sharply whenever they returned from leave, like a word that sounds strange once you look at it too long. The hub processed 4,300 fauna intake tags per standard cycle. It had not had a Category 8 or above live specimen breach in 11 years. The 11-year streak was noted in the station's public confidence report, which had been drafted 6 months ago in response to 2 high-profile containment failures at other stations in the Pelin Reach. The report used the word exemplary 3 times. The intake manifests from Deck 4 always arrived 6 minutes late. Everyone on the processing floor had adjusted their workflow to account for this. No one had filed a correction request for the delay in 4 years. The 6 minutes was not a clerical error. It was a load-bearing fiction, and everyone who worked near it understood this without having to discuss it. Deputy Warden Fesic Oron began every shift by reading the overnight incident summary aloud to himself. Not because protocol required it. It did not. Because page 1, paragraph 3 of the Pelin Reach Containment Codex stated that situational awareness required active engagement with available data. He had internalized this. His colleagues would say, quietly and only to each other, that he had perhaps over-internalized it. Fesic was 1.9 meters tall, Neshari species, with a horizontal band of 11 photoreceptive clusters that his species used in place of paired eyes. His exoskeletal surface was matte gray. Neshari stress banding, the darkening of the exoskeletal surface under cortisol-equivalent pressure, was publicly visible and professionally considered unflattering to display at work. Fesic's banding had been near charcoal for approximately 3 days. It was now, as he stood outside holding Tier Bren South with his codex open to page 218, the darkest it had been since the containment review had begun. He had invoked regulatory authority 4 times in the last hour. All 4 times, he had invoked it at people who were not disputing him. Brest Talon had opened the incident classification field. The dropdown offered 47 options. She closed it again. The Scarath had been in holding Tier Bren South for 22 days. She was an adult female of her species. Category 9.4 on the Pelin Reach Fauna Threat Index, which had 9 categories and had only added the 4th decimal tier for the Scarath classification specifically. She spanned 11 meters from cranial ridge to rearmost anchor limb. She had 12 limbs, 4 primary load-bearing, 4 secondary manipulation, 4 posterior stabilizers. Her dorsal ridge carried hollow pressure spines that injected a fast-acting paralytic on contact. Her breath carried an aerosolized compound that the database cataloged as a contact hazard for most known species in the corridor. She had neutralized 3 sedation attempts. She had damaged the secondary barrier twice. She had rendered 4 prior containment teams non-operational across 6 certified engagement attempts at other stations before she arrived at Casanorvith. The terminal clearance counter had been set at 72 hours, extended once on petition from the Xenobiology Observation Desk, and now sat at 19. The automated escalation systems were configured to treat any countdown pause that was not a formal cancellation as a compliance failure. The suppression team had been on standby since 600. The observation gallery outside holding Tier Bren South had an authorized occupancy of 3 personnel. It currently contained 41. Among them, containment specialist Gorath Onves, Neshari senior handler, both primary limbs crossed, stress banding the darkest of anyone in the gallery except Fesic. He had not moved in 6 minutes. Among them, Veth Salin, junior compliance observer, Ulhari species. The Ulhari were slender bipeds with a slow bioluminescent pulse in the upper chest cavity that brightened under emotional engagement and could not be suppressed. Veth's 4 narrow sensory filaments, which her species had instead of ears, and which angled involuntarily toward objects of sustained interest, were pointed at the contact window. Her chest pulse was dim and steady. She had, at some point in the last 40 minutes, stopped pretending to take notes. On Deck 7, Yusuf Abenov was replacing a corroded intake valve on the fauna processing line when the primary breach alarm sounded. He was aware it was the primary breach alarm and not the advisory tone. The two sounds were distinct. Station workers on their first rotation sometimes confused them. Yusuf was not on his first rotation. He finished seating the valve. He put the cap back on his thermos. He picked up his kit. Then he walked toward the sound, not away from it, at a pace that one witness would later describe as unhurried in a way that felt deliberate. He reached the gallery corridor 2 minutes and 40 seconds after the alarm sounded. He found 41 people watching something through reinforced glass. He looked through the glass for approximately 4 seconds. Then he asked, to no one in particular, whether anyone had documented the foreleg load-bearing discrepancy. No one answered him. Several people looked at him. Several more looked back at the glass. No one had been looking at the foreleg. Fesic Oran became aware of Yusuf Abenov approximately 2 seconds after Yusuf said this. He turned. He looked at the station jacket, the kit, the maintenance tier sleeve markings. He checked his secondary visual cluster, which Neshari used for peripheral confirmation. He said, "Who authorized a Tier 2 maintenance worker in this corridor?" Yusuf looked at him. "I'm just standing in the corridor," he said. "I haven't done anything yet." "Yet," Fesic said. "I noticed she's carrying compensatory load on her rear primary anchor limb," Yusuf said. "The anterior limb on the same side is probably fractured. You can see it in the weight transfer if you watch the sequence when she shifts her stabilizers." Fesic's stress banding darkened 2 shades. He did not look at the animal. He looked at Yusuf. Section 14.7 of the Pelin Reach Containment Codex specifies that only personnel with a minimum of Grade 5 Fauna Specialist certification may enter a Category 7 or above active containment space. Your sleeve marking indicates a Tier 2 maintenance classification. Do you have a Grade 5 certification? No, Yusuf said. Then this conversation is over. What's the current Grade 5 plan? Yusuf asked. Fesic said, the suppression team is standing by for the accelerated terminal clearance. Yusuf was quiet for a moment. He was watching the Scarath through the glass. She had shifted her weight again, a small movement, almost imperceptible, but the rear primary anchor limb took the load a fraction of a second late. He could see the microflinch in the dorsal plating when it did. "How many did the suppression team lose on the last 3 attempts?" he said. Fesic's banding did not change, but he did not answer. "I'm not asking to replace your protocol," Yusuf said, same volume, same pace. "I'm asking what it costs you to wait 11 minutes and see if there's something wrong with the limb." Fesic straightened to his full height. He turned slightly in the corridor, positioning himself between Yusuf and the gallery entrance in a way that was not quite a physical barrier, but was not quite not one either. Yusuf waited for him to finish. This was, Talon would note in her incident log, the first documented instance of a maintenance tier worker outlasting a Grade 7 authority figure in a corridor standoff by the simple method of not moving. Fesic said, "You will provide your station identification, your current duty assignment, and the name of your shift supervisor, and then you will return to your assigned work area." Yusuf gave him all 3, then he said, "She's been in that tier for 22 days. She's neutralized 3 sedation attempts. She damaged the barrier twice. None of that is territorial behavior. Territorial animals don't sustain defensive lock for 3 weeks. They either escalate to attack or they withdraw. She hasn't done either." Fesic opened his codex. He found page 218 with the ease of long practice. The upper right corner of the cover was smooth from years of single-finger indexing. He ran his finger down the page. He did not find a procedure that covered this. "The Codex," he said carefully, "does not require me to take the behavioral analysis of a maintenance worker into account when managing a Category 9.4 active containment situation." "No," Yusuf agreed, "it doesn't." He let that sit. "I worked at a rail yard in Kazakhstan for 3 years," he said. Amur leopards had established a denning site inside the decommissioned facility. About 11 of them by the end. They were semi-feral, not domesticated, and they were not interested in being approached. I learned how to tell the difference between a large felid that is deciding whether to attack and a large felid that is deciding whether anything in the room is worth trusting. Those are different problems. They have different solutions. Fesick said, "Amur leopards are not Category 9.4 fauna." "No," Yusuf said, "but the body language is the same. Watch the eye track pattern. Watch what she does with her weight when she hears a new sound. She's not sizing up a target. She's running a cost-benefit analysis on every stimulus in the room and coming up empty. She hasn't found anything in 19 hours worth the energy of an attack, which means she's either exhausted, in pain, or both. I've been watching her for 6 minutes, and I've counted 3 chronic pain indicators and 0 territorial displays." He looked at Fesick. "She isn't deciding whether to attack," he said. "She's deciding whether anything in this room is worth trusting. That's a different problem. I know how to work with that one." The gallery had been quiet for most of this exchange. It was now quieter. Talon, watching from the observation desk, noted that Gorath Onves had turned his head approximately 30 degrees toward the corridor where Yusuf was standing. He had not uncrossed his limbs, but he had turned. Fesick ran his finger along the edge of page 218. He did not look up from the codex. "You have no certification," he said. "You have no formal training record for Category 7 or above contact attempts. You have no equipment rated for close-range exposure to aerosolized hemolytic compounds. What you have is an anecdote about leopards." 3 years of anecdote, Yusuf said, with no fatalities. Fesick's banding had not changed since the start of the conversation. It was still the darkest shade in the corridor except for Gorath, whose had shifted, fractionally, in the last 4 minutes, 2 shades lighter. Fesick looked at Yusuf for a long time. Then he looked through the reinforced glass. The Scarath had not moved during the conversation. She was facing the observation window, which she had been doing at irregular intervals for 11 days. The xenobiology desk had logged this as orientation behavior response to movement and light variation in the corridor. Her cranial ridge was elevated, which was a documented stress marker. Her dermal plating was cycling through a slow sequence. A dark amber state, then a banded gray, then back to amber. Documented, both states in the database. Her rear primary anchor limb was taking weight a quarter-second late on every shift. Fesick looked at this for a moment. His banding did not change. His expression, insofar as Neshari physiognomy permitted reading, did not change. He said, "You are requesting 10 minutes. No weapons. Suppression team on standby, full aboard at my discretion. And a PA cycle suspension in Bren South Sector," Yusuf said. "And floor vibration from the adjacent cargo processors reduced to 30% output. She's been responding to the vibration. I can see it in her stabilizer tension. If she's got a fracture site, the vibration is hitting it on a regular interval. That's going to be making her angrier than anything we've done." Fesick looked at him. "You derived that from watching her through the glass for 6 minutes. 8 minutes now," Yusuf said. Fesick closed the codex. He did not admit that Yusuf's analysis was correct. He did not admit anything. What he admitted, in the precise language of a grade 7 official who had just run out of a particular kind of alternative, was that initiating an accelerated terminal clearance 11 hours ahead of schedule on a specimen that had made the last 3 certified engagement attempts look like administrative errors was a decision he was not prepared to enter into the record without having first documented every available option. "Conditional field evaluation," he said. 10 minutes. My discretion overrides all of it." "Understood," Yusuf said. He set his kit down on the corridor floor. He took off his outer station jacket and folded it over the gallery rail. He checked the contents of his kit once, a brief scan, nothing pulled out, just confirmation, and then picked it up. He did not check anything else. He had been wearing the same expression since he walked into the corridor. The gallery count was 67 when Yusuf reached the tier access. Fesick transmitted the PA suspension request and the vibration reduction order. He stood with his codex under his arm. He did not look at Gorath Onves, who had not moved and had not spoken, and whose stress banding was now, quietly, in increments. Talon was the only one tracking, 3 shades lighter than it had been 20 minutes ago. Talon made a note of this. She made a note of everything. She still had 47 dropped-on options and no way to use any of them. The tier access sealed behind Yusuf, with a sound like a held breath releasing. The tier access sealed, and Yusuf Abenov was alone with 11 meters of apex predator, and a kit he had not yet opened. He did not move toward her. He did not open the kit. He stood at the entry point for approximately 4 seconds, let his eyes adjust to the tier's interior light, and then sat down on the floor. Cross-legged, weight even, slightly sideways, not square on, both hands resting open on his knees. The Skarath reacted immediately. Her dermal plating cycled through 3 states in fast sequence. Dark amber, banded gray, a deep red-brown that the database had documented from 2 prior containment records. Then a 4th state appeared. No record, the cycling slowed. 11 meters between them, she had not moved. In the observation gallery, 67 people were watching a man sit on the floor. Talon opened her incident log. She created a new subfield, provisionally labeled behavioral note, and began typing. At minute 1, the subject's chromatic cycling interval was 7 seconds. She noted this. She did not know what it meant yet. She noted that too. Fesik Oran stood at the gallery window with his codex under his arm. He had not opened it in 4 minutes. This was, Talon would note, the longest recorded interval between codex consultations since Fesik had arrived on Casa Norvith 14 months ago. Yusuf waited. At minute 2, the juvenile appeared. It emerged from behind the Skarath's rear stabilizer limbs, small, gray-scaled, moving with the particular confidence of a young creature that has not yet learned which things in the world are dangerous. It was, Talon estimated, approximately 12 days old. It moved toward Yusuf the way young things move toward anything new, without permission, without apology, and without the faintest awareness that it was doing something its mother had not authorized. Yusuf let it come. He did not extend a hand. He did not adjust his posture. He sat, and the juvenile reached him and investigated his boot with the thorough attention of something that has not yet developed a concept of threat. The Skarath watched all of this. Her chromatic cycling had slowed. 7-second intervals had become 12. Yusuf stood up, slowly, the kind of slow that has intention behind it, not hesitation, not caution, but deliberateness. He held his kit up at shoulder height. Open hands, visible contents. A standard-issue fauna treatment pack, a thermal wrap, a small, flexible brace rated for load-bearing limb support. Nothing edged, nothing that made sound. He walked to 8 meters. He sat down again. The Skarath's cranial ridge lifted, then settled. Her chromatic cycling had not resumed its fast sequence. 12-second intervals held. Veth Salen's chest pulse, which had been dim and steady since the shift began, went from dim to a soft, even glow. Her filaments were angled at the contact window at an angle her colleagues would later describe as total. She had stopped holding her stylus. Yusuf moved to 6 meters, paused, then to 4. Each movement slow enough that it could not be read as approach, only as a decision the animal could accept or interrupt. The Skarath did neither. She watched. Her plating had settled into the 4th state, the undocumented one, and stayed there. He reached the rear primary anchor limb. He opened his kit. The Skarath's head turned toward him. Her cranial ridge was low. She was breathing in long, slow draws. Talon could see the lateral plates of her thorax expanding and contracting, a rhythm she had not shown in any prior observation log from the 22 days in this tier. No sudden moves, no quick sounds, no reason to revise what she had apparently decided about this specific person in this specific 4-minute window. He worked. 9 minutes. His hands stayed in the lower half of his field of view, visible to her at all times. He found the fracture site on the 3rd pass. She flinched once, a tight microcontraction of the stabilizer cluster, and he stopped and waited and then continued at a different angle. The thermal wrap went on in sections. The flexible brace followed. He worked the way he had worked in a rail yard in Kazakhstan in winter, when a 130-kilogram animal's tolerance was the only permission structure that mattered, and moving too fast meant starting over from 0. Her breath moved across his back. The aerosolized compound the database cataloged as a contact hazard for most known species in the corridor passed over him in a slow wave of heat. He bent into the work. It moved past him. He kept working. When he finished, he sat back. Not away, just back, settling his weight off the limb, tools closed, kit set to one side. His hands returned to his knees. The Skarath's cranial ridge came down, slowly, by degrees, until her muzzle was resting against his knee with the weight of something that had made a decision and was done negotiating it. The juvenile was still on his boot. Talon stopped typing. She looked at the contact window. She looked at her incident log. She looked at the drop-down field with its 47 options. She wrote in the behavioral note subfield. At minute 14, the Skarath's chromatic cycling ceased entirely. Plating stabilized in an undocumented configuration, low saturation, faint gold amber, distinct from all 11 states in the current database. I have assigned this state a provisional reference in my log. I used the word settled. I acknowledge this is not a clinical term. I stand by it. In the gallery, the silence had been running for 9 minutes. Gorath Anves uncrossed his limbs. He had been still for so long that the small movement drew 3 pairs of eyes. He looked at the contact window. Then, to no one, to the gallery air, in the flat tone of a man completing a thought he had started some time ago, he said, "I have been doing this for 19 years. He did not finish the sentence. He did not need to. Fesick looked at him. Talon looked at him. Several of the 67 unauthorized gallery occupants looked at him. Gorath did not offer the rest of the thought. He looked back at the window. His stress banding was, at this moment, lighter than it had been in 3 days. He had the expression of someone who has just understood something he does not particularly want to have understood. The open loop that left in the gallery, what does 19 years of certified training mean when you are watching this, did not close. It would not close here. It would close later in a different room in a conversation that lasted 22 minutes and ended with a man writing down an answer he found unsatisfying. The automated system registered the terminal clearance countdown at minute 29. The pause had not been formally canceled. No formal cancellation had been filed. No cancellation, no override. No one had touched the right form. The suppression activation alert routed to the 2 armored officers standing by outside the tier access. The system logged this as a compliance protocol trigger, which it was, because the system was not capable of the distinction between a countdown pause that meant, "This is not over," and a countdown pause that meant, "Something happened here and we are still watching it." The pressure seal on the tier access released. The pneumatic hiss of the door starting its arc. Yusuf heard it before he saw it. The same sound the decommissioned rail yard's main gate had made in the cold. A pressure differential finding equilibrium, mechanical and unhurried. He was on his feet in the same motion he had used 100 times, not fast, exactly, but immediate, the body doing what it had practiced before the mind had finished the question. He crossed the distance to the door in 4 steps. He was standing in the doorway, both arms extended, back to the tier, facing the officers, before the door had finished opening. The officers stopped, one hand's width behind them, Fesick Orun. His stress banding was now the darkest Talon had ever recorded on an Eshari in a professional setting. His codex was under his arm. He had not opened it. Yusuf looked at the officers. He did not raise his voice. "She let me treat her," he said. Same volume he had used to describe the foreleg discrepancy in the corridor. Same pace he had used to wait out Fesick. She made that choice. She reached across every reason she had not to 22 days of this station, 3 sedation attempts, 6 failed engagements before she got here, and she arrived at a different conclusion. She offered something your records don't have a word for yet, because every species in this corridor has spent its whole history teaching apex fauna that trust is always the wrong answer. She looked at the math, and she changed her answer. If those weapons discharge, you lose every second of the last 31 minutes. You lose the officers in this doorway. You prove her right about every single thing she has been afraid of since she got here. He held the officer's eyes. "I am asking you not to do that." Behind him, the Skarath rose. She did not move toward the door. She did not lower her cranial ridge. She rose to her full span, 11 meters, all 12 limbs taking weight, the hollow pressure spines along her dorsal ridge visible in the tier's overhead light, and stood at the center of the space. Her dermal plating cycled through 2 states fast and then settled. The 5th undocumented configuration, pale, low saturation, almost luminescent against the gray polymer walls, but not luminescent, not the word, because the light was not generated, it was released. A slow unwinding of tension in the chromatic cells that produced something closer to the color of early morning than anything the database had tried to name. Talon wrote, "I used the word settled. I stand by it." In the gallery, 69 people were all looking at one thing. Fesick Orun looked at the Skarath. He looked at Yusuf. He looked at 69 people looking at him. He said, "Stand down, close the access." The door reversed. Yusuf turned back to the tier. He walked to where he had been sitting at a pace that had not changed once in the last 31 minutes. He sat down. He put his hands on his knees. The juvenile was still on his boot. The automated compliance system logged Fesick's verbal order as an unauthorized override of a triggered suppression activation sequence. The system required a formal justification filing within 48 hours. Fesick was aware of this. He had been filing justification documents for 14 months. He had never once, in 14 months, stared at a justification field and not known what to write in it. He was aware of this, too. The gallery did not disperse for 14 minutes after the access closed. People left one at a time, in the order, roughly, of those who had other places to be but had been unable to make themselves go there while the window was still showing what it was showing. Some of them had shift reports due. Some of them had fauna intake processing that would now run behind schedule, and the 6-minute fiction from Deck 4 would not cover the difference. None of them left quickly. Veth Solin left last. Her chest pulse had been steady bright for 40 minutes. It did not dim when she left the gallery. Her filaments, as she turned away from the window, angled back toward it once, involuntary, the way attention moves before the body does, and then she walked away down the corridor and did not look back. At 3:40 station time, Space Orcs filed 2 documents simultaneously. The first was a formal request for suspension of the terminal clearance order, citing an active behavioral contact event of uncertain classification and requesting a minimum 14-day evaluation extension pending outcome assessment. He had written this document in 11 minutes. It was precise. It was thorough. It cited 4 relevant sections of the Codex and noted accurately that none of them directly addressed the current situation. The second was a personal annotation to the operational record. He wrote it in 23 minutes. He read it 3 times. It said, "The current Codex was written to prevent recurrence of documented failures. It does not contain a procedure for outcomes that have not previously occurred. This represents a structural gap. I am recommending review." He sent both documents. His stress banding was still 4 shades from his resting state. He had not slept. Yusuf Abenov was reclassified the following morning. His new designation, Contact Specialist, Non-Certified Track, did not exist in the Pelin Reach HR system at the time the reclassification was requested. A junior administrator named Ossel Varn created it. She spent approximately 40 minutes on this, which included the time required to determine which existing classification framework to attach it to, and whether non-certified was a permanent qualifier or a track toward certification. She flagged both questions for review. She filed the reclassification anyway. She would later describe this as the most interesting administrative problem she had encountered in 2 years on the desk, which was saying something, because 2 weeks later she would also be the person who added the 48th classification code. The Scareth was transferred to an expanded habitat module on the station's outer observation ring. The formal record used her new designation, Skorenveth, a transliteration of her own low-frequency identification call rendered by the Xenoacoustics team as meaning approximately one in residence. The Xenobiology desk had requested the name change. Fesic had approved it in 4 seconds, which was the fastest he had approved anything in 14 months. The juvenile, now 11 days older than it had been on the day of the incident, had developed a habit of sitting on the access threshold of the habitat module and watching the cargo traffic on the outer ring with the expression of something that has decided the outside world is primarily interesting and is collecting data accordingly. The Xenobiology desk had 11 active observation logs on the juvenile alone. All 11, Talon noted when she reviewed them, were optimistic in tone. Space Orcs requested a meeting with Yusuf Abenov 6 days after the incident. The meeting lasted 22 minutes and took place in a small conference room on Deck 8 that smelled of the same recycled nitrogen as the rest of the station, which is to say it smelled of nothing in particular, which is what Casanorvith smelled like to anyone who had been there long enough. Fesic sat across from Yusuf with a notepad. He asked, with considerable precision, what Yusuf had seen in the first 4 minutes through the observation glass that 22 days of certified handlers had not. Yusuf thought about this for a moment. He had the look of a man completing a task before responding to the question, which Fesic now recognized as simply how his face worked. "I looked at the limb she was favoring," Yusuf said, "and I asked what would make an animal that size favor a limb. Everything after that was just showing up slowly." Fesic wrote this down. He found the answer unsatisfying in a way he could not fully explain. He had expected something more, a method, a framework, a set of observable criteria that could be extracted and codified. What he had received was a question and a pace. He wrote it down anyway. The 3-jurisdiction review concluded 9 days after the incident. The committee that oversaw the Pelin Reach Containment Authority's public confidence review played the 31-minute contact footage twice during their final session. During the first viewing, 4 committee members took notes. During the second viewing, no one took notes. The room was quiet in the way that rooms get quiet when the people in them have understood something that does not fit inside their current terms of reference. 6 days after the review concluded, the Containment Authority added a 48th classification code to the incident log drop-down menu used by all compliance officers in the Pelin Reach sector. The code was created by Asil Varn, the junior administrator who had also created Yusuf's job title. She would describe this, later, as the most productive administrative afternoon of her career. The field description read, Contact, Voluntary, and ONCORCED, Fauna Initiated. Bress Talon opened her incident log. She scrolled to the classification field. She selected the 48th option. She clicked Confirm. It took approximately 4 seconds. She set her stylus down. She tapped the flat of her second administrative finger against the edge of her desk. Once, twice, 3 times. Then she stopped.